The airplane wheels touched down on American soil with a gentle thud that sent a wave of relief through Staff Sergeant Isaiah Rodriguez. After 15 long months in the dusty mountains of Afghanistan, he was finally back home. The cabin around him buzzed with the quiet chatter of passengers gathering their belongings, but Isaiah sat still for a moment, taking it all in. The familiar sounds of his native language, the clean air flowing through the ventilation system, and most importantly, the knowledge that he was just 2 flights away from hugging his wife and twin daughters. Isaiah stretched his tired muscles as he stood up from his cramped middle seat. The flight from Germany had been long, but it was nothing compared to the journey that brought him here. Just 3 days ago, he had been in a forward operating base, treating wounded soldiers and saving lives under the harsh Afghan sun. Now wearing his Army combat uniform with its faded patches and desert tan boots, he grabbed his small carry-on bag and made his way down the narrow aisle. Denver International Airport was bustling with the usual afternoon crowd. The business travelers rushed past with their rolling suitcases, families dragged sleepy children toward their gates, and the constant announcements echoed through the terminal speakers. Isaiah felt a bit overwhelmed after months of military bases and quiet outposts. The civilian world seemed so loud and chaotic compared to the structured environment he had grown used to. He checked his phone and smiled at the lock screen photo of his family. His wife Carmen had sent him a text earlier that morning. Flight 447 to Phoenix leaves at 6:30 p.m. We'll be waiting at the gate with the biggest welcome home signs you've ever seen. His 8-year-old daughters, Sophia and Luna, had drawn pictures of airplanes and soldiers that Carmen had photographed and sent to him. Even after all these months, seeing their faces made his heart race with excitement. But first, he needed to collect his checked luggage. Isaiah had packed light for his deployment, but coming home meant bringing back some personal items, gifts for his family, and his dress uniform for an upcoming ceremony. He followed the signs toward baggage claim, his combat boots making soft, squeaking sounds on the polished airport floor. The baggage claim area was crowded with travelers from multiple flights. Isaiah found carousel number 4 and waited patiently as the conveyor belt started moving. He pulled out his phone again and called his wife. "Hey, beautiful," he said when Carmen answered. "Isaiah. Oh my goodness. Are you here? Are you in Denver?" Her voice was filled with joy and excitement. "Just landed. I'm getting my bags now, then I'll head to the gate. I should be home by 9 tonight. The girls are so excited they can barely sit still. Luna made you a welcome home cake that looks more like a construction project, and Sophia practiced her reading so she can read you a story tonight." Isaiah laughed, feeling the stress of deployment melting away with each word from his wife. "Tell them Daddy can't wait. I've missed you all so much." As he talked, Isaiah noticed 2 airport security officers standing near the entrance to the baggage claim area. One was a middle-aged white man with graying hair and a permanent frown, while the other was younger, possibly Asian, and seemed less serious. They appeared to be scanning the crowd, watching people as they collected their luggage. "I love you, Carmen. I'll call you when I get to the gate for my connecting flight." "Love you too. Fly safe." Isaiah ended the call and focused on the luggage carousel. His black duffel bag appeared after a few minutes, and he grabbed it quickly. The bag contained mostly clothes, some books, and a few souvenirs he had picked up during his rare free time in Afghanistan. Nothing valuable or important, just personal items that reminded him of his journey. As he slung the bag over his shoulder, Isaiah felt someone approaching from behind. He turned around to see the 2 security officers he had noticed earlier walking directly toward him. "Excuse me, sir," the older officer said, his voice stern and official. Isaiah could see his name, Tagrid Morrison. "We need to see some identification." Isaiah was confused but remained polite. In the military, you learned to respect authority and follow orders, even when you didn't understand them. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" "Just routine security," Morrison replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We've had some reports of suspicious activity in this area." Isaiah reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out his military identification card. He had carried this ID for over 6 years, through multiple deployments and countless security checkpoints. The photo was a few years old, but it clearly showed his face, rank, and military status. Morrison took the ID and examined it closely, turning it over in his hands multiple times. His partner, whose name tag read Chen, stood slightly behind him, looking less convinced about whatever was happening. "This says you're in the Army," Morrison said, stating the obvious. "Yes, sir, Staff Sergeant Isaiah Rodriguez. I just returned from Afghanistan this morning. I'm on my way home to Phoenix to see my family." Morrison looked Isaiah up and down, taking in his military uniform, his posture, and his respectful demeanor. For some reason that Isaiah couldn't understand, the officer seemed skeptical. "How long were you deployed?" Chen asked, his voice more conversational than his partner's. 15 months. I'm a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne Division. We were stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman. Isaiah wasn't sure why he was providing so much detail, but something about the situation felt off. Other travelers were starting to notice the conversation, and a few people had slowed down to watch what was happening. Morrison handed the ID back to Isaiah, but his expression remained suspicious. "What's in the bag?" "Personal belongings, sir. Clothes, books, some gifts for my family." Isaiah was beginning to feel uncomfortable, but he maintained his military bearing and continued to answer the questions respectfully. "Mind if we take a look?" This request caught Isaiah off guard. He had been through dozens of security checkpoints, both military and civilian, but he had never been asked to open his personal luggage after already passing through airport security. "Is there a specific reason you need to search my bag, officer?" "I've already been through TSA screening." Morrison's expression hardened. "Sir, we have the authority to conduct additional security checks when we deem necessary. Are you refusing to cooperate?" Isaiah felt his heart rate increase, but not from excitement this time. He recognized the tone in Morrison's voice. It was the same tone he had heard from soldiers who had already made up their minds about something, regardless of the facts. He had seen this kind of determination before, and it rarely led to good outcomes. "No, sir, I'm not refusing. I'm just trying to understand the situation." Chen stepped forward slightly. "Look, it's probably nothing serious. If you cooperate, we can get this sorted out quickly and you can be on your way." Isaiah nodded and set his duffel bag on a nearby bench. He unzipped it slowly, revealing neatly folded uniforms, civilian clothes, a few paperback books, and wrapped gifts. Everything was organized with military precision, exactly what you would expect from a soldier returning home from deployment. Morrison rifled through the contents, examining each item carefully. He held up a small wrapped box. "What's this?" "A necklace for my wife. I bought it at the base exchange in Germany during my layover." Isaiah was trying to stay calm, but the situation was becoming more bizarre by the minute. As Morrison continued his search, Isaiah noticed that other travelers were now openly staring. Some had even pulled out their phones, though he couldn't tell if they were recording or just checking messages. He felt exposed and embarrassed, standing in his military uniform while being treated like a criminal in front of dozens of strangers. The whole situation felt surreal. Just hours ago, he had been saying goodbye to fellow soldiers who respected him as a leader and a lifesaver. Now he was being questioned like a suspect, despite having done nothing wrong except try to get home to his family. Morrison finished, searching the bag, and stepped back, but his suspicious expression hadn't changed. "Where exactly are you headed?" "Phoenix, Arizona. Sky Harbor Airport. My wife and daughters are waiting for me." "How long since you've been home?" 15 months. Like I said earlier. The questions continued, each one making less sense than the last. Isaiah began to realize that no matter how he answered, these officers had already decided he was somehow suspicious. The thought made him angry, but his military training kicked in. Stay calm, follow orders, don't escalate the situation. But, as the minutes ticked by, Isaiah couldn't shake the feeling that something much worse was about to happen. Isaiah could feel the eyes of dozens of travelers watching him as Officer Morrison continued his questioning. What had started as a simple ID check was turning into something much more serious, and he couldn't understand why. He had answered every question honestly, shown his military identification, and even allowed them to search his personal belongings. Yet Morrison's suspicious glare hadn't softened one bit. "So you're telling me you've been in Afghanistan for over a year?" Morrison asked, his voice carrying a tone that suggested he didn't believe a word Isaiah was saying. "Yes, sir, that's correct. 15 months with the 82nd Airborne Division. I'm a combat medic." Isaiah kept his voice steady and respectful, though. Frustration was building inside him. He glanced at his watch and realized his connecting flight would start boarding in less than 2 hours. He still needed to get through security again and find his gate. Morrison leaned closer, lowering his voice but keeping it loud enough for his partner to hear. "You know what I think? I think something doesn't add up here. You're awfully nervous for someone who's just trying to catch a flight home." Isaiah blinked in surprise. "Nervous?" "Officer, I'm not nervous. I'm tired and eager to get home to my family, but I'm certainly not nervous about anything." "Then why are you sweating?" Morrison pointed at Isaiah's forehead. Isaiah almost laughed, despite the seriousness of the situation. "Sir, I just spent 15 months in the desert heat of Afghanistan, then sat on an airplane for 18 hours, and now I'm standing in a crowded airport wearing a heavy military uniform. Of course I'm sweating a little." Chen, the younger officer, shifted uncomfortably. He had been watching the interaction and seemed less convinced than his partner that Isaiah posed any threat. "Morrison, maybe we should what?" Morrison cut him off sharply. "Do our job? This whole situation feels off to me, Chen. A guy in military uniform shows up with a bag full of stuff, claims he's been overseas, has all these convenient answers for everything. How do we know that uniform is even real?" Isaiah felt his patience starting to wear thin. "Officer, you can call the military police if you have doubts about my credentials. You can contact my commanding officer. You can verify everything I've told you through official channels. But I need to catch my flight home to my family." "Oh, now you're trying to tell us how to do our job?" Morrison's voice was getting louder, drawing even more attention from passers-by. "That sounds like someone who has something to hide." A small crowd had begun to form at a respectful distance. Most people pretended to be looking at their phones or checking the flight information boards, but Isaiah could tell they were listening to every word. He felt embarrassed and frustrated, but mostly he felt confused. In all his years of military service, including multiple deployments and countless interactions with security personnel, nothing like this had ever happened to him. "I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job, sir. I'm just trying to understand why I'm being detained when I haven't done anything wrong." "Detained?" Morrison laughed coldly. "Who said anything about being detained? We're just having a conversation. Unless you're refusing to cooperate with airport security." Isaiah recognized the trap in Morrison's words. If he insisted on leaving, Morrison would claim he was being uncooperative. If he stayed, Morrison could continue this interrogation indefinitely. It was a no-win situation, and Isaiah suspected that was exactly what Morrison intended. Chen stepped forward again, his voice more diplomatic than his partner's. "Look, Sergeant Rodriguez, we appreciate your service and we're not trying to give you a hard time. But we have to follow certain procedures when something seems unusual." "What exactly seems unusual about a soldier flying home from deployment?" Isaiah asked, genuinely wanting to understand. Morrison jumped back into the conversation before Chen could answer. "What seems unusual is your attitude. Most people cooperate fully with security without asking so many questions. I am cooperating. Fully. I've shown you my ID, answered your questions, and let you search my bag. What more do you want from me?" "I want you to stop acting like you're in charge here," Morrison snapped. "You may think that uniform gives you some kind of special treatment, but it doesn't." Isaiah was stunned by the hostility in Morrison's voice. He had encountered difficult people during his military service, but this felt personal, in a way he couldn't understand. He looked around at the growing crowd of onlookers and noticed that several people now had their phones out, clearly recording the interaction. "Officer Morrison," Isaiah said calmly, "I have great respect for law enforcement and security personnel. I'm not trying to cause any problems. I just want to understand what I'm being accused of so I can address your concerns." "Nobody said you were accused of anything," Morrison replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But since you brought it up, let me ask you this. Have you been using any illegal substances? The question hit Isaiah like a physical blow. Excuse me? You heard me. Have you been using drugs? Marijuana? Anything like that? Isaiah's military training kicked in, keeping his voice level despite his shock. No, sir, I have not. I'm subject to regular drug testing as a member of the United States Army. I have never used illegal drugs. Morrison stepped closer to Isaiah's duffel bag and made a show of sniffing near it. Funny, because I'm detecting an odor that suggests otherwise. That's impossible, Isaiah said firmly. There are no drugs or drug-related items in my bag or anywhere else. Are you calling me a liar? Morrison's voice was rising again. I'm stating a fact. There are no illegal substances in my possession. Chen looked increasingly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. He glanced nervously at the crowd of people who were now openly watching and recording the encounter. Several travelers had pulled out their phones, and Chen could see the red recording lights on multiple devices. Morrison, Chen said quietly, maybe we should call this into the supervisor before... Before what? Morrison interrupted. Before we do our job? I don't think so. He turned back to Isaiah. Sir, I'm going to need you to step over here with me for additional screening. Isaiah felt his heart sink. Additional screening for what? I've already been through TSA security. You've searched my bag. What possible reason could you have for additional screening? The reason is that I'm a federal security officer and I'm telling you to do it, Morrison said, his hand moving closer to the handcuffs on his belt. Are you going to comply, or are we going to have a problem? Isaiah looked around at the crowd of people watching him. He saw expressions of confusion, sympathy, and anger on various faces. A woman with 2 small children looked upset and was trying to shield her kids from seeing what was happening. An elderly man in a veteran's cap was shaking his head in disgust. Several young people continued recording with their phones. Officer, I want to comply with your instructions, but I also want to understand my rights in this situation. Am I free to leave? Not until we complete our security screening. And what does that screening involve? Morrison's patience appeared to have run out completely. It involves whatever I determine it needs to involve. Now, are you going to cooperate? Or am I going to have to arrest you for obstruction and failure? To comply with airport security? The word arrest sent a chill through Isaiah. He thought about his wife and daughters waiting for him at the airport in Phoenix. He thought about the welcome home signs they had made and the cake his daughter had baked. He thought about all the soldiers he had saved during his deployment and all the times he had risked his own life to help others. I am cooperating, Officer Morrison. I'm simply asking questions about a situation that seems to be escalating without cause. The cause is your suspicious behavior and your refusal to follow simple instructions, Morrison said, reaching for his handcuffs. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Wait, Chen said, stepping forward. Morrison, I really think we should call the supervisor before we... I'm not waiting for anything, Morrison said firmly. This individual is being uncooperative and evasive, and I'm placing him under arrest. Isaiah couldn't believe what he was hearing. In a matter of minutes, he had gone from being a decorated soldier returning home from war to being treated like a criminal in front of dozens of strangers. The injustice of it was overwhelming, but his military training told him to remain calm and follow orders even when those orders made no sense. Officer, I understand you believe you're doing your job, but I strongly disagree with your assessment of this situation. I would like to speak with your supervisor before this goes any further. Too late for that, Morrison said, pulling out his handcuffs. You should have thought about cooperation earlier. As the cold metal clicked around Isaiah's wrists, he heard several people in the crowd gasp and express their outrage. Someone shouted, "This is wrong," while another person called out, "He's a soldier." But none of that mattered now. Isaiah Rodriguez, combat veteran and decorated hero, was being arrested in the middle of Denver International Airport for reasons he still didn't understand. The cold metal handcuffs bit into Isaiah's wrists as Officer Morrison led him through the busy airport terminal. Every step felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Just 2 hours ago, he had been excited about seeing his family. Now he was being paraded through Denver International Airport like a common criminal, with dozens of travelers staring and recording everything on their phones. "This way," Morrison said roughly, guiding Isaiah toward a security office near the back of the terminal. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everything feel even more surreal. Isaiah kept his head up and his shoulders straight, drawing on every lesson his drill sergeants had taught him about maintaining dignity under pressure. Even in handcuffs, he walked with the bearing of a soldier. He could hear whispered conversations from the crowd following behind them, words like disgraceful and he's in uniform floating through the air. Officer Chen walked beside them, his face showing clear signs of discomfort. Every few steps he would glance at Isaiah, then at his partner, then at the growing crowd of people who were documenting everything with their smartphones. Chen had been in airport security for 3 years, and he had never seen a situation escalate this quickly over what seemed like nothing. "Morrison," Chen said quietly as they approached the security office, "I really think we should slow down here. Maybe call Captain Williams before we process him." "We're processing him exactly according to procedure," Morrison replied, though his voice carried less confidence than before. He was uncooperative, evasive, and showed signs of suspicious behavior. Isaiah couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Officer Chen, I want you to know that I answered every question honestly, showed my identification willingly, and allowed you to search my personal belongings. At no point was I uncooperative." "Save it for your statement," Morrison said, pushing. "Open the door to the security office." The office was small and cramped, with 2 desks, several filing cabinets, and a holding area with a metal bench. The walls were covered with security protocols, emergency procedures, and photos of wanted suspects. Isaiah was directed to sit on the bench while Morrison began filling out paperwork. Chen stood near the door, still looking uncomfortable. He pulled out his radio and spoke quietly into it. "Control, this is Officer Chen. We've got a situation in Security Office 4. Could you please notify Captain Williams that we need her down here?" "Copy that, Chen. She's currently handling something at Gate B12, but I'll get the message to her." Isaiah sat on the cold metal bench, trying to process what had just happened to him. 15 months ago, when he had deployed to Afghanistan, he never could have imagined that coming home would involve being arrested in an airport. He thought about his wife Carmen, who was probably tracking his flight and getting excited that he would be landing in Phoenix soon. He thought about his daughters, who had spent weeks preparing for his return. "Officer Chen," Isaiah said calmly, "I'd like to make a phone call to let my family know what's happening." "You'll get your phone call after we finish processing you," Morrison said without looking up from his paperwork. "What exactly am I being charged with?" Isaiah asked. Morrison finally looked up. "Obstruction of airport security operations, failure to comply with lawful orders, and suspicion of possession of controlled substances." Controlled substances? Isaiah was genuinely shocked. "You didn't find any controlled substances on me or in my belongings." "I detected the odor of marijuana on your person and belongings." "That's impossible. I've never used marijuana in my life, and I'm subject to random drug testing as a member of the military." Chen shifted uncomfortably near the door. Something about this whole situation was bothering him more and more. He had watched the entire interaction from the beginning, and he couldn't recall Morrison actually detecting any drug odors. In fact, Chen had been close enough to smell anything himself, and he hadn't noticed anything unusual. "Morrison," Chen said, "I was right there during the search. I didn't smell anything." Morrison looked up sharply at his partner. "Are you questioning my judgment, Chen?" "I'm just saying I was there too, and I didn't detect any odors." The tension in the small office was thick. Isaiah watched the exchange between the 2 officers and realized that Chen was having serious doubts about what had just happened. That gave him a small amount of hope that maybe someone would listen to reason. Chen walked over to his desk and sat down at his computer. "I'm going to run a more thorough check on his credentials while we wait for Captain Williams." "His credentials checked out fine the first time," Morrison said. "I know, but I want to make sure we have all the information before the captain gets here." Chen typed Isaiah's name and military ID number into the federal database system. The first search had confirmed that Isaiah Rodriguez was indeed an active duty soldier. But Chen wanted to dig deeper. Something about Morrison's behavior was troubling him, and he wanted to have all the facts before their supervisor arrived. As Chen clicked through different screens, his expression began to change, his eyes widened, and he leaned closer to his monitor. "Morrison," Chen said quietly, "you need to see this." "See what?" "Come look at this computer screen." Morrison reluctantly got up from his desk and walked over to Chen's workstation. When he saw what was on the screen, the color drained from his face. The database showed Isaiah's complete military record, including his service history, awards, and commendations. But what made both officers stop breathing for a moment was the list of honors Isaiah had received during his recent deployment in Afghanistan. Chen read aloud, "Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States. Bronze Star with V device for heroic achievement in ground combat. Purple Heart for wounds received in action against an enemy force." Morrison stared at the screen in disbelief. "That can't be right." Chen kept reading. "Staff, Sergeant Isaiah Rodriguez single-handedly saved the lives of 8 fellow soldiers during a Taliban ambush on Forward Operating Base Chapman. Despite being wounded by shrapnel, Rodriguez continued to provide medical aid under heavy enemy fire for over 2 hours until reinforcements arrived." Isaiah could hear every word from where he sat, but he remained silent. He had never been one to boast about his military service or his awards. In fact, most people in his unit didn't even know about all his commendations because he rarely talked about them. Chen clicked on another link, and more information appeared on the screen. "Morrison, look at this. He's scheduled to receive the Distinguished Service Cross next month at a ceremony in Washington, D.C. That's the second highest award for valor in the entire Army." Morrison's face had gone from confident to confused to what looked like panic. "Keep reading," he said quietly. "It says here that his story was featured in Military Times magazine last month. The headline was Hero Medic Saves 8 Lives in Afghanistan Firefight. There's even a photo of him receiving the Silver Star from a general." Chen turned to look at Isaiah, who sat calmly on the metal bench with his hands still cuffed behind his back. "Sir, is this information accurate?" Isaiah nodded. "Yes, it is." "You saved 8 soldiers' lives?" "I did my job. That's what medics do." Chen looked back at his computer screen and continued reading. "Morrison, there's more. It says he's been selected as one of the honor guards for the Veterans Day ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery. And look at this. He's scheduled to meet with military leadership next week about a promotion to Sergeant First Class." Morrison was reading over Chen's shoulder, and his face was getting paler by the minute. The man they had just arrested wasn't just any soldier. He was a decorated war hero whose story had been featured in national military publications. The man Morrison had accused of drug possession and suspicious behavior had risked his own life to save his fellow soldiers and had been recognized at the highest levels of the military for his courage and sacrifice. "There's something else," Chen said, clicking on another link. "He's been invited to speak at the National Military Appreciation Month ceremony next year. The Secretary of Defense personally requested his participation." Isaiah watched the 2 officers as they read through his military record. He could see the realization dawning on their faces. They had made a terrible mistake. But he also saw something else in Morrison's expression: fear. Morrison was beginning to understand that he had just arrested one of the most decorated soldiers in recent military history for absolutely no reason. "Officer Chen," Isaiah said calmly, "I think it's time to call your supervisor." Chen nodded, his face showing a mixture of respect and embarrassment. "Captain Williams should be here any minute." Morrison was still staring at the computer screen, reading about Isaiah's heroic actions in Afghanistan. The man he had treated like a criminal had saved 8 lives while wounded and under enemy fire. The man he had accused of drug possession had never received so much as a speeding ticket in his entire adult life. As if on cue, the door to the security office opened, and Captain Patricia Williams walked in. She was a 20-year veteran of airport security, a no-nonsense professional who commanded respect from everyone who worked under her. She took one look at Isaiah sitting in handcuffs and immediately knew something was very wrong. Captain Patricia Williams stood in the doorway of the small security office, her eyes moving from the computer screen displaying Isaiah's military honors to the decorated soldier sitting in handcuffs on the metal bench. 20 years in airport. Security had taught her to read situations quickly, and everything about this scene screamed that something had gone terribly wrong. "Officer Chen," she said in a controlled voice, "please explain to me why we have a member of the United States military in custody." Chen stood up straighter, his face showing the strain of the last 30 minutes. "Captain, Officers Morrison and I approached Sergeant Rodriguez during routine security monitoring. There were some concerns about suspicious behavior, and the situation escalated." "Suspicious behavior?" Captain Williams walked closer to the computer screen and began reading Isaiah's military record. Her expression grew more serious with each line. "Staff Sergeant Isaiah Rodriguez, Silver Star recipient, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart." She looked up at Morrison. "This is the suspicious individual you arrested?" Morrison shifted uncomfortably but tried to maintain his authority. "Captain, at the time of initial contact, we didn't have access to his complete military record. He was acting nervous and evasive during questioning." Isaiah spoke for the first time since Captain Williams entered the room. "Ma'am, with respect, I answered every question these officers asked me. I provided my military identification immediately and allowed them to search my personal belongings without resistance." Captain Williams turned to face Isaiah directly. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I want to hear your version of what happened here from the beginning." Isaiah straightened his shoulders as much as he could while still handcuffed. "Ma'am, I landed at Denver International Airport approximately 1 hour ago on a connecting flight from Germany. I was returning from a 15-month deployment in Afghanistan. I went to baggage claim to collect my personal items before catching my connecting flight to Phoenix, where my wife and daughters are waiting for me." "Continue." "Officers Morrison and Chen approached me at baggage claim and asked to see my identification. I provided my military ID card immediately. Officer Morrison then asked to search my personal bag, which I allowed. After that, the questions became more aggressive and Officer Morrison accused me of drug possession, which is completely false." Captain Williams looked at Morrison. "You accused him of drug possession?" "I detected the odor of marijuana on his person and belongings," Morrison said, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier. "Officer Chen," Captain Williams asked, "did you also detect this odor?" Chen hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "No, ma'am, I did not." The silence in the small office was deafening. Captain Williams walked over to Isaiah and knelt down to look at him eye level. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I want to personally apologize for what has happened here. This is not how we treat members of our military, and it's certainly not how we treat American heroes." She stood up and turned to Morrison. "Remove those handcuffs immediately." Morrison fumbled with his keys, his hand shaking slightly as he unlocked the restraints. Isaiah rubbed his wrists where the metal had left red marks, but he maintained his composure. "Thank you, Captain," Isaiah said simply. Captain Williams sat down at Chen's desk and continued reading through Isaiah's military file. "Sergeant Rodriguez, it says here that you saved 8 soldiers during a Taliban attack. Can you tell me about that?" Isaiah looked uncomfortable talking about his actions, but he answered respectfully. "Ma'am, on March 15th, our forward operating base came under heavy attack. Several soldiers were wounded and pinned down by enemy fire. As the unit medic, it was my responsibility to provide medical aid and evacuate the wounded. The report says you continued treating wounded soldiers for over 2 hours while under enemy fire, even after you were wounded yourself." "Yes, ma'am. That's what medics do." Captain Williams shook her head in amazement. "Sergeant Rodriguez, what you did goes far beyond normal duty. You're a hero, and you should be treated as such." She turned back to Morrison, her voice becoming stern. "Officer Morrison, I want a full written report on my desk within the hour explaining every detail of this incident." Morrison's face had gone pale. "Captain, I was just following security protocols." "Security protocols?" Captain Williams interrupted. "Show me the protocol that says we arrest decorated soldiers for the crime of trying to get home to their families." While Captain Williams was speaking, Chen's computer chimed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen and his eyes widened. Captain, you need to see this. What is it? I just received an alert from our social media monitoring system. There are multiple videos of Sergeant Rodriguez's arrest being shared online. One of them already has over 50,000 views. Captain Williams closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Show me. Chen clicked on the link, and a video began playing on his computer screen. It showed Isaiah in his military uniform, calmly answering questions while Morrison searched his bag. The audio was clear enough to hear Morrison's increasingly hostile tone and Isaiah's respectful responses. Look at the comments, Chen said, scrolling down below the video. The comments section was filled with outrage from viewers. Veterans organizations were already sharing the video, and military families were expressing their anger at how Isaiah had been treated. One comment read, "This is disgusting. A hero comes home from war and gets arrested for nothing." Another said, "I served 3 tours in Iraq and this makes me sick. Where's the respect for our soldiers?" Captain Williams watched more of the video, her expression growing darker with each passing second. "How many views did you say this has?" 50,000 and climbing fast. It's being shared by military groups, veterans organizations, and civil rights advocates. Isaiah felt a mix of emotions watching the video of his own arrest. On one hand, he was grateful that people were supporting him. On the other hand, he was embarrassed that his humiliation was being broadcast to thousands of people. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Captain Williams said, "I want you to know that this incident does not represent the values of Denver International Airport or our security team. We have the utmost respect for our military personnel, and what happened to you today was completely unacceptable." "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that." Captain Williams picked up her radio. "Control, this is Captain Williams. I need the airport. Director in Security Office 4 immediately. Tell him it's urgent." "Copy that, Captain. He's on his way." Morrison sat down heavily in his chair, realizing that his career was probably over. The video evidence was clear, and there was no way to spin his actions as justified. He had arrested a war hero based on nothing more than his own prejudices and poor judgment. Chen continued monitoring the social media response. "Captain, this story is spreading fast. Local news stations are starting to pick it up. Channel 7 News just posted an article titled 'Decorated Soldier Arrested at Denver Airport.' What does the article say? It includes background information about Sergeant Rodriguez's military service and his recent awards. They're asking for comment from airport security and the TSA. Isaiah's phone, which had been returned to him when the handcuffs were removed, began buzzing with notifications. Text messages from friends and family members who had seen the video online were pouring in. He saw several missed calls from his wife, Carmen. "Captain Williams," Isaiah said, "may I call my wife? She's waiting for me at the airport in Phoenix and I need to let her know what's happening." "Of course, Sergeant. Take all the time you need." Isaiah stepped to the corner of the office and dialed Carmen's number. She answered on the first ring. "Isaiah, thank God, I've been trying to call you for 30 minutes. Your cousin Roberto sent me a video." "Carmen, I'm okay. I'm safe. There was a misunderstanding at the airport, but it's being resolved." "A misunderstanding?" "Isaiah, I watched a video of you being arrested. What happened?" Isaiah could hear the stress and worry in his wife's voice, and it broke his heart. After 15 months of deployment, all he wanted was to hold her and his daughters. Instead, he was explaining why he had been handcuffed in an airport. "There were some security officers who questioned my credentials. It's been cleared up now, but I'm going to miss my connecting flight. The girls are here with me. They saw the video too. Luna is crying because she thinks you're in trouble." Isaiah felt his emotions welling up for the first time since this ordeal began. The thought of his 8-year-old daughter crying because she saw her father being arrested was almost too much to bear. "Tell the girls that Daddy is fine and that I'll be home soon. I love you all so much." "We love you too. Come home safe." As Isaiah ended the call, the office door opened and Airport Director Robert Hayes walked in. He was a tall man in his 50s, who looked like he had been pulled away from an important meeting. "Captain Williams, what's the emergency?" Director Hayes asked. Then he noticed Isaiah in his military uniform and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Captain Williams stood up. Director Hayes, I need to brief you on a serious incident involving one of our security officers and Staff Sergeant Isaiah Rodriguez, a decorated war hero returning from deployment in Afghanistan. Director Hayes looked at Isaiah, then at the computer screen showing his military record. 6 months had passed since that difficult day at Denver International Airport, and the world had changed dramatically for everyone involved. Isaiah Rodriguez sat in a comfortable conference room at the Department of Veterans Affairs in Washington, D.C., looking out at an audience of airport security directors, police chiefs, and military liaison officers from across the country. Today, he was sharing his story not as a victim, but as an educator and advocate for change. When I walked into that airport in Denver, Isaiah began, his voice steady and confident, I was just a soldier trying to get home to his family. I never expected that my experience would lead to conversations happening in airports, police departments, and government offices nationwide. The audience listened intently as Isaiah recounted the events of that March afternoon. His story had become much more than just a viral video. It had sparked a national conversation about bias, respect, and the treatment of military personnel and minorities in public spaces. Director Robert Hayes, who had traveled from Denver specifically for this conference, raised his hand. Sergeant Rodriguez, can you tell us about the changes that have been implemented since that incident? Isaiah smiled, remembering how different Director Hayes had been that day compared to the man he had gotten to know over the past 6 months. The response has been incredible. Denver International Airport became the first major airport in the country to implement mandatory bias training for all security personnel. They also created a special recognition program for military members, transitioning through their facility. The changes at Denver Airport had been swift and comprehensive. Within 2 weeks of Isaiah's arrest, Captain Williams had worked with military liaisons to develop new protocols for interacting with service members. Security officers now received training on military identification, deployment procedures, and the importance of treating veterans with dignity and respect. But the changes went far beyond just training, Isaiah continued. Denver Airport also established a military family support center right in Terminal B. It's a quiet space where service members and their families can rest, make phone calls, and get assistance with travel issues. They have volunteers there who are all military veterans themselves. Officer Chen, who was also in the audience, had volunteered to help develop the new training programs. After the incident, he had requested a transfer to the Military Support Unit, where he now helps coordinate services for traveling veterans. His partnership with Isaiah had grown into a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to preventing similar incidents. Officer Chen and I work together. Now, Isaiah explained to the audience, he helps train new security personnel, and I share my perspective as someone who experienced the system at its worst and then helped make it better. The viral video of Isaiah's arrest had reached over 5 million views across different platforms. Major news networks had covered the story, interviewing Isaiah, his family, and airport officials. The overwhelming public response had been supportive of Isaiah and critical of the treatment he received. But what surprised many people was Isaiah's response to the situation. Instead of pursuing lawsuits or demanding punishment for Officer Morrison, Isaiah had chosen a different path. He worked with airport officials to create positive change and used his platform to educate others. A lot of people asked me why I didn't sue the airport or demand that Officer Morrison be fired, Isaiah said, addressing a question that came up frequently during his speaking engagements. The truth is, punishing one person wouldn't solve the bigger problem. But creating better training, changing policies, and opening conversations, those things can prevent this from happening to other people. Officer Morrison had indeed faced consequences for his actions. He was suspended for 30 days without pay and required to complete extensive bias training and anger management counseling. More importantly, he was reassigned to duties that didn't involve direct interaction with the public. Morrison had also written a personal letter of apology to Isaiah, acknowledging his mistakes and expressing genuine remorse for his actions. The incident had prompted changes far beyond Denver's airport. The Transportation Security Administration had reviewed the case and issued new guidelines for all airports regarding the treatment of military personnel. Several other airports had implemented their own military support programs, and bias training had become standard at security checkpoints nationwide. Isaiah's family had also been affected by the attention. His wife Carmen had initially been angry and hurt by what happened to her husband, but she had gradually become supportive of his decision to turn the experience into something positive. Their daughters, Sophia and Luna, were now old enough to understand what had happened, and they were proud of how their father had handled the situation. "My daughters learned an important lesson from all of this," Isaiah told the audience. "They learned that when bad things happen, you can choose to respond with anger and bitterness, or you can choose to respond with grace and work to make things better for everyone." The speaking engagement in Washington was part of Isaiah's new role as a military liaison and diversity trainer. He had been promoted to Sergeant First Class and was now stationed at Fort Belvoir, where he worked with the Army's Equal Opportunity Office. His job involved traveling to military bases, airports, and law enforcement agencies to share his story and help improve relationships between veterans and civilian authorities. During the question and answer session, a police chief from Texas asked about the long-term impact of the incident. "Sergeant Rodriguez, how do you think this experience has changed the way veterans are treated when they travel?" Isaiah thought carefully before answering. "I think it's opened people's eyes to the fact that you can't judge someone based on how they look or where you think they come from. I was wearing a military uniform with my name tape and rank clearly visible, but that didn't matter to Officer Morrison. He saw what he expected to see instead of what was actually in front of him." He paused and looked around the room. "But I've also seen incredible changes. Last month I was traveling through Atlanta Airport, and a security officer recognized me from the news coverage. Instead of treating me with suspicion, he thanked me for my service and asked about my family. That's the kind of interaction every veteran should have." The conference concluded with airport directors and police chiefs committing to implement similar training programs in their own jurisdictions. Several attendees approached Isaiah afterward to request his assistance in developing their programs. As Isaiah prepared to leave Washington and return home to his family, he reflected on how much had changed since that March day in Denver. What had started as the worst travel experience of his life had become an opportunity to create positive change for countless other veterans and travelers. His phone buzzed with a text message from Carmen. "The girls are making welcome home signs again. Luna says this one is even better than the first one because now she knows how to spell hero correctly." Isaiah smiled as he read the message. His daughters had indeed learned to spell hero, but more importantly, they had learned what it really meant. A hero wasn't just someone who saved lives in combat. It was someone who used difficult experiences to help others and make the world a little bit better. 6 months later, Officer Chen still worked at Denver Airport, but now as part of the military support unit. He often thought about that day and how it had changed his perspective on his job. Instead of seeing travelers as potential threats, he now saw them as people with stories, families, and destinations that mattered to them. Captain Williams had been promoted to Director of Security Operations and had become a national advocate for improving airport security training. She frequently spoke at conferences alongside Isaiah, sharing the administrative perspective on how to implement meaningful change in large organizations. Even Director Hayes had become personally involved in military support initiatives. Denver Airport now hosted an annual Veterans Day ceremony, and Hayes made sure that every veteran traveling through their facility on that day received special recognition and assistance. The viral video that had once represented injustice and discrimination had become a symbol of redemption and positive change. It was now used in training programs across the country as an example of how not to treat travelers and how one person's grace under pressure could inspire widespread reform. Isaiah boarded his flight home to Virginia. He was greeted by a flight attendant who recognized him. "Sergeant Rodriguez," she said with a warm smile. "Thank you for your service, both in the military and in making travel safer and more respectful for everyone." Isaiah settled into his seat and looked out the window as the plane prepared for takeoff. Somewhere below, in airports across the country, security officers were treating veterans with dignity and respect, partly because of what had happened to him 6 months ago. The journey home was no longer just about reaching a destination. It had become about making sure everyone's journey was treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. And that, Isaiah thought as the plane lifted off, was a mission worth continuing for the rest of his life.